Well, ladies and gentlemen, it is a great pleasure to be with you all this evening. I am absolutely thrilled to be here in Iceland. This is my first visit, and I will guarantee you it will not be my last. I have so enjoyed my brief stay in your wonderful country, and what a great event this evening. Thank you all so very much for being able to attend and learn something about hemp, CBD, and certainly some of the things that we are doing. Appreciate the wonderful introduction. My name again, Dr. Stuart Titus, the President Chief Executive Officer of a public company in the United States known as Medical Marijuana Incorporated. Though our name suggests different, we're really a hemp and CBD focused company. And we've been working with European farmers to grow a high concentration CBD within the hemp crop dating back to the year 2007. Now, throughout the recorded time of history, we've seen cannabis being used medicinally. Ancient records going back to as much as 2,700 years BC in China and 2,500 years BC in Egypt all show written records of cannabis's use, its oils, tinctures, various preparations being used. And certainly in the United States, cannabis was used medicinally. Doctors were prescribing it widely from the 1850 to 1937 era. And here I was able to photograph some old-time cannabis-based medicines that are nicely displayed in various cannabis museums in Amsterdam as well as in Barcelona, Spain. And it wasn't until 1937 we had the passage of the unfortunate Marijuana Tax Act in the United States that lumped in hemp with marijuana and unfortunately made this compound and substance illegal. So previously, many large pharmaceutical companies, such as Eli Lilly, for example, had in its 1935 medical catalog listed 23 different types of cannabis-based medicines. So you can see in that era, doctors knew cannabis was working to help people overcome health challenges. They prescribed it widely. Interestingly enough, 6 million years BC, there are records of an internal endogenous cannabinoid system that was identified in mammalian creature fossil remains, interestingly enough. So this internal endogenous cannabinoid system has been with us for quite a long time. It was actually formally discovered in medicine in 1988 by Drs. William Devane and Alan Hallett, University of St. Louis Medical Center, and their study was titled The Determination and Characterization of a Cannabinoid Receptor in a Rat Brain. So interestingly enough, in our human bodies, we have receptors for these cannabinoids. The CB1 receptor, widely expressed in the brain, the spinal column of the central nervous system. In 1993, we discovered a CB2 receptor in the gut, the viscera, the internal organs of the body, which relates to immune function. 2012, our company was the first one to think about producing a nutraceutical, hemp-based CBD product, which was available on U.S. world markets. October 17, 2018, Canada legalized recreational cannabis, and certainly the first sales occurred on that particular date. And another wonderful event for us, December 20th, 2018, the U.S. Farm Bill was signed into law by our U.S. President Trump. It's also known as the Agricultural Improvement Act of 2018. But for the first time in 82 years in America, it will be bringing back industrial hemp as a full-on agricultural crop. It'll qualify for crop insurance like many other crops will. Soon there will be a hemp and a CBD futures market that will develop in Chicago so farmers can hedge their risk, etc. And certainly this new legislation also legalized the derivatives of hemp, including CBD, throughout the U.S. Now, of course, as the U.S. goes, so goes the rest of the world, and we're certainly excited about some of the great things we've been doing here in Europe with CBD. So interestingly enough, CBD used to be known as the hippie's disappointment. Even though it was the first known and identified cannabinoid back in 1940, the progressive marijuana growers in the mid-1960s, when we had this cultural revolution. We had the Beatles, we had rock and roll music, we had the war in Vietnam, the unfortunate war that the U.S. was involved with, and of course all the young draftees, myself included, were generally very large cannabis users, and certainly the progressive marijuana growers of the day knew about CBD, and they decided, well, let's try to grow a high concentration CBD in a marijuana crop, because maybe there'd be an effect if you smoke a cannabis cigarette, or what's called in vernacular a joint. Well, it turns out if you smoke a CBD-based joint, there's no psychoactive, no hallucinogenic effect, and so CBD became known as the hippie's disappointment. It was the thing that gave you a headache. It was considered worse than worthless. And this lasted for 50 years until a group of us enterprising entrepreneurs thought that, okay, if we did this a little bit differently, if we grew a high concentration CBD in a hemp crop, and instead of smoking your CBD, if we made finished products, oils, tinctures, and various other products where people could use topically or ingest, certainly maybe get 25, 50 milligrams of CBD at a time, this might help support overall levels of health and wellness. So certainly we went ahead and did this. It took us quite a while, but through the successive crop rotations from 2007 to 2011, each year we got successively higher and higher concentrations of CBD in this particular crop. Finally, we, in the fall of 2011, thought we had a high enough concentration to be somewhat useful. We went ahead and did our extractions, and this was a process that's very similar to taking olives to a plant where they'll then make olive oil. We took our hemp, and from that we made a CBD-rich hemp oil. Now, again, just for a basic education, this is my full medical presentation. We certainly won't go through all the slides, but there's some slides I'd like to present to you just to give you a little difference about what we're talking about. And if we look at the cannabis plant, perhaps, as being the parent plant, you might have two offspring. On one side, we have hemp, which can grow very tall, as much as 10 to 20 feet in height in a very short 90 to 120 day growing cycle. It's certainly something that can be grown for a high concentration of the non-psychoactive cannabinoid, CBD. Around the world, it's mostly grown for its fiber used in textile purposes, although our neighbor to the north in the U.S., Canada, hemp seeds are very nutritious, and hemp seed oil, hemp protein powder products have formed a very large import-export business with the U.S. So thus, those of us in the U.S. generally import about $600 million worth of these fine hemp food products on an annual basis. Now, marijuana, on the other hand, generally grows very short and bushy. A lot of it is grown indoors. It's grown for a high concentration of the psychoactive cannabinoid, THC. It's basically grown for its psychoactive effect, and there's no real industrial application, versus hemp, which has about 50,000 different industrial uses. Again, hemp food products are fully legal in the U.S. by federal law, found regularly at health food stores throughout our country, and certainly this is hemp seed oil, hemp protein powder. Although marijuana remains illegal at the federal level in the U.S., 33 of our U.S. states have now legalized the medical use of marijuana, and we now have 11 states that have approved the recreational use of cannabis. So certainly this is a very interesting trend that's happening around the world. Now, the overall global cannabis market is quite large. I mean, the black market, the drug cartels from Mexico, et cetera, have really penetrated and developed the market since the mid-1960s. So here's some data from New Frontier Data shows that the global cannabis consumer market, about $344 billion US annually. Now, getting to some of the science that hopefully some of you might be really interested in. Of course, within the human body, we have a great number of traditional recognized systems: our muscular system, our skeletal system, our circulatory system, nervous system, et cetera, et cetera. And in the mid to late 1980s, we discovered two new systems within the human body. The first one, this what we call electrical circulatory system, and even though we don't plug ourselves into the wall to recharge our batteries like we do our cell phones, when we go to sleep at night, we really do restore a lot of interesting electrical activity. And even though we don't think about electrical activity too much in medicine because it's all drugs and pharmaceuticals, et cetera. We really are electrochemical beings, and certainly hemp itself has got some very interesting electrical properties that chemical engineers such as Dr. David Midland are now developing hemp-based batteries and supercapacitors that are able to store energy. But we think some of the benefit that hemp and CBD has been providing to people of the world who are able to access it and use it, partly because of the beneficial electrical activities that help us to more efficiently run our human bodies. Also, in 1988, as I mentioned previously, the discovery of the internal endogenous cannabinoid system. I think here's a nice picture description showing your CB1 receptors, again, widely expressed the brain, spinal column of the central nervous system, CB2 receptors in the gut, the viscera, the internal organs. So this internal endogenous cannabinoid system is the largest self-regulatory system in the human body, governing just about every physiological process within us. So things such as mood, sleep, appetite, hormone production, the digestion of food, and even metabolism is all regulated by this internal endogenous cannabinoid system. Basically, the body's internal cannabinoid system can be summarized as the body's ability to maintain itself and function in the proper environment. So this internal endogenous cannabinoid system really regulates the balance, or what we call the homeostasis, within us. And certainly it's interesting to note that the CB1 receptors in the brain are the most widely expressed of all the brain's neurotransmitter receptor sites. And thus, if you can feed those particular receptors, perhaps this is going to help people to come to a higher level of health and wellness, because it's going to support the body's internal endogenous circulatory system, particularly the central nervous system, and certainly we've seen so many great benefits by working with this particular system. Now, as I mentioned, the internal endogenous cannabinoid system, our bodies do produce our own internal cannabinoids, anandamide and 2-AG, as we mentioned. But what happens within the human body, we have enzymes and enzymatic processes that generally degrade these internal endogenous cannabinoids very, very quickly. So they only have a very short shelf life within us, and thus we really need to supplement our diets with these plant cannabinoids. Because they aren't as quickly degraded, they have a much longer shelf life, and thus can confer many interesting health and wellness benefits. This internal endogenous cannabinoid system is really present from day 16 of gestation. It's intimately involved with the development of the central nervous system of the fetus as the human body then starts to develop. Now, the brief summary maybe of the internal endogenous cannabinoid system. Many researchers call it the biology of being well, and I think this has a great potential application for us. Certainly, the internal endogenous cannabinoid system is critical to chronic illness because it is a tremendous anti-inflammatory. There's some great research at the U.S. government level that led to a U.S. government patent in 2003. This research, titled Cannabinoids as Antioxidants and Neuroprotectants, describes a wide range of potential therapeutic benefits. So the cannabinoids on the antioxidant, anti-inflammatory side, certainly great benefit for any patient who's got these inflammatory conditions. This includes your metabolic syndrome patient, heart disease, cardiovascular risk, your diabetes, rheumatoid arthritis patients. They all go into the doctor, have their blood drawn, and generally the blood markers that come back will show these very elevated inflammatory scores. And within 6 to 8 weeks of taking CBD products, we've seen many of these patients, their numbers start to come down to the more normal level, to the point where some diabetics, type 2 diabetics, have actually been able to wean themselves off of insulin because their markers are now coming down to the more normal level. And then on the anti-inflammatory side, rather on the neuroprotective side, great potential benefit for your neurological conditions. Now, CBD, besides having an effect on your CB1 receptors in the brain also has a tremendous effect on many other receptor sites. We can read the list here. Very interesting to see CBD works on this particular receptor, technically called the 5-HT1A. It's a serotonin receptor. So serotonin is kind of a feel-good chemical. Generally, people who are depressed have very low levels of serotonin. Some of our research has shown that patients who start taking a course of CBD therapy can improve their serotonin levels by as much as 86%. So this helps them to feel good about themselves, not have the normal stress and depression that other individuals might flow. CBD has also been shown to modulate resting cerebral blood flow levels. Certainly CBD has been shown to be what's called an allosteric modulator, just meaning it helps to change some of the activity of the receptor sites on particularly your opioid receptors. So there are many individuals in the U.S. who are regularly prescribed opioid pain medicines. After 3 to 4 days, some of these individuals can be hooked and addicted, and very interesting to see patients who finally get on CBD after their addictions kind of run through a several-month course, all of a sudden find that, oh, I don't really feel like having as many opioids today. And we think there's some great potential benefit for some of these disorders. And certainly it does seem that the CB1 receptor and the opioid receptors share some significant communication attributes. Some of this gets to be a little technical, but it's also interesting to note that our human bodies do have pain receptor sites, and of course, anecdotally, many people use cannabis to help control pain. Certainly, CBD also has an interesting effect on these particular, what we call TRPV1 pain receptors. There's some nice information here from our U.S. National Institute on Drug Abuse. This was a presentation by the executive director of NIDA, as it's called, and she presented this information to the U.S. Senate, talking about CBD, barriers to research and potential medical benefits. And here, Dr. Volkow was looking at the tremendous number of potential benefits, everything from anti-seizure, and you can read the rest in terms of anti-inflammatory, analgesic, anti-anxiety, etc. And certainly the National Institute on Drug Abuse has been very good in terms of funding a lot of CBD research. And here is another bit of information from the National Institute on Drug Abuse, how cannabidiol, CBD, may enable drug addiction recovery. Certainly want to mention that, and CBD may also reduce methamphetamine addiction in rats. So there's, again, some very early research looking at this. The American Chemical Society also shows that CBD has the ability, of course, to cross the blood-brain barrier. Thus it's being used to help control epileptic seizures in many children. The medical conference here, many of the children who have this unfortunate disorder also have epilepsy and epileptic seizure disorders, and certainly we've had some interesting research with this. But it's interesting that you can also attach other pharmaceutical molecules along with CBD, and like a Trojan horse, you can kind of bring these pharmaceutical medications that wouldn't normally cross the blood-brain barrier. Now they're hitching a ride along with CBD, and they will cross the blood-brain barrier. Those who are using it for pain, 30% plus have mentioned that they are fully off all their opioid medications. So I think that's got some real profound significance. Well, again, thank you very much for allowing me the opportunity to come to your native country. I'm sorry I don't speak Icelandic. Certainly look forward, though, to many more trips to your beautiful country. I'm just so impressed, I can't even tell you about it. My first recollection of Iceland was back when I was a teenager, and this was back, of course, many, many years ago. Some of us in the audience might remember the famous chess match. The U.S., kind of the brash young fellow Bobby Fischer against the grandmaster from Russia, Boris Spassky and all, but we heard of Reykjavik and how wonderful Iceland was and all the natural geothermal energy, et cetera, et cetera. And being here personally, wow, it is just a total eye-opener. I'm just so excited to be here. Thank you so very, very much for your attendance this evening. It was a fantastic event, my gosh. And I believe we might have one more quick speaker at some point, so let me turn this back over to our host. Thank you again so very, very much. It's a great pleasure to be here with everybody.